My girlfriend looked me in the eye and said she needed to find herself. She said it gently, the way you say something when you have already decided and just need the other person to accept it quietly. I smiled. I nodded. I said I understood. I understood more than she realized. And I had already decided something too. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was 36 years old, living in a 3-bedroom townhouse in Westport, Connecticut, and I had spent the last 3 years building what I believed was an unshakable life with Sophia Mercer. Sophia was 33. She was a freelance photographer, the kind who shot editorial work for regional magazines, the kind whose Instagram had 40,000 followers who called her authentic. She had long dark hair, a laugh that filled rooms, and a specific talent for making every person she spoke to feel chosen. She had made me feel chosen for 3 years. We met at a gallery opening in Soho. She was shooting the event. I was there with a colleague I barely knew. She photographed me by accident, showed me the frame, and said I had good bone structure with such complete disinterest that I immediately wanted her attention. 3 years later, we were living in Westport. I worked in wealth management, remote 3 days a week, commuting into Manhattan the other 2. We had a dog, a 3-year-old rescue named after a street we walked down on our first night together. We had a routine, a shared calendar, a life that had its own specific gravity. And she had Carter Reed. Carter was her ex. Not ancient history, recent history. They had dated for 2 years before she and I met. He was a documentary filmmaker based in Portland who posted black and white photographs of coastlines and wrote captions about solitude and impermanence. He had been a presence in the background of our relationship from the beginning. Not aggressively, subtly, the occasional like on her photos. The birthday text she mentioned too casually. The name that surfaced in stories about her past with a frequency that felt slightly above average. I had never said anything. I am not a jealous person by nature, and I had learned early in life that naming a fear gives it more power than ignoring it. So I ignored Carter Reed for 3 years. Until February, when Sophia sat across from me at our kitchen table with a cup of tea. She wasn't drinking and told me she needed space. Not from us, she said. From herself. From a version of herself that had gotten lost inside our shared routine. She wanted to travel. 2 weeks. The Pacific Northwest, Portland, the coast, sometime in nature. She wanted to go with Carter. As friends, she said, because he knew those places. Because he understood her creative process. Because sometimes you needed someone from your past to help you reconnect with who you were before. She said all of this looking directly at me. Her voice was steady. Her hands were wrapped around the mug she wasn't drinking from. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled. And I said, go. She blinked. I think she had prepared for resistance. For the conversation to become a negotiation, a fight, a scene that would require managing. Instead, I refilled my coffee and asked if she wanted eggs. What Sophia did not know, what she had no reason to suspect, was that 3 weeks earlier I had found something. Not by snooping. By accident. The specific, devastating kind of accident that reframes everything you thought you knew about the last several months of your life. I had been looking for an old receipt on her laptop. She had asked me to find it while she was in the shower, had left the browser open, had not considered what else might be visible in adjacent tabs. The tab I was not supposed to see was a conversation. Long detailed. The kind of conversation that has its own private language. References, callbacks, a tenderness that doesn't develop in weeks. Carter and Sophia had been talking for 4 months. Not as friends reconnecting. As people already deep inside something. I closed the laptop. I found the receipt. I said everything exactly as she had left it. When she came downstairs, I handed her the receipt and said nothing. I spent the next 3 weeks being completely normal. I cooked dinner. I walked the dog. I laughed at the right moments. I held her in bed with the easy comfort of someone who has no idea what is coming. And I thought with more clarity than I had experienced in years. Because grief, when it arrives before the loss, has a way of sharpening everything. I thought about what I wanted. Not what I wanted to feel, what I wanted to do. The difference between those two things is where most people lose themselves. By the time she sat down with her tea and told me about the trip, I had already made every decision I needed to make. Now, let me stop here for a second, because I want to know what you would have done in that moment. She's sitting across from you. She's asking to take a 2-week trip with her ex. You already know what the trip actually is. Do you say yes and let it play out? Do you confront her right then? Do you walk away immediately? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely asking. She left on a Thursday morning. I drove her to the train station. I carried her bag to the platform. I kissed her on the cheek. I told her to take good photos. She looked at me with something that might have been guilt and might have been relief. I drove home. I called my attorney from the car. Not a divorce attorney. We weren't married. A property attorney. Because 3 months earlier, in a different kind of conversation, we had begun discussing buying the Westport townhouse together. The lease was in my name. The discussion had been preliminary. Nothing had been signed. I needed to confirm the exact position I was standing in before I moved a single piece. The attorney confirmed what I already suspected. The lease was mine. The furniture was documented. I had receipts for nearly everything, a habit from years of careful record-keeping that had never felt significant until now. The shared account we had opened for household expenses had a balance I would need to address cleanly. By Thursday evening, I had a clear picture. I spent the first weekend of her trip doing something methodical and completely quiet. I separated everything. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would signal anything to a returning person hoping to still manage the situation. Just clearly, legally, completely. Her things, the items that were genuinely hers, the equipment, the personal objects, the clothes, I packed with care. I was not cruel about it. I used good boxes. I labeled everything correctly. I arranged for them to be stored at a facility 10 minutes from the apartment of her closest friend, Valentina Langford, who lived in Brooklyn and who I had already contacted by the time I sealed the last box. Valentina, to her credit, did not pretend she didn't know what was happening. She said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know what to say to you." I told her she didn't need to say anything. I told her where the storage unit key would be left. Then I called the landlord and confirmed the lease renewal under my name only, which it already was, and which required no change at all. By the end of that first week, the apartment was mine again. Not reorganized, not emptied, just honestly itself. The dog stayed. He had always been mine first. She had loved him the way you love something that belongs to someone else. Warmly, genuinely, but without the specific weight of ownership. On day 9 of the trip, Sophia called. It was evening. She was somewhere on the Oregon coast. Her voice had that particular softness that comes from someone who has been outside all day and is slightly sun-tired. She talked about the light on the water. She talked about a small town they had stopped in. She talked about feeling more like herself. She did not mention Carter by name. Not once in 22 minutes. I listened. I asked small questions. I let her talk until she was finished. Before she hung up, she said, "I miss you." I said, "I know." She paused for a moment. I think she was waiting for me to say it back. I didn't. She said goodnight. I said goodnight. I think she felt something shift in that pause. I think she knew, in the part of herself that was still honest, that something had already changed. But she still had 5 days left on the coast with Carter. And whatever she had decided to do with those 5 days, she had decided it long before that phone call. Here is what I want to ask you before this ends. And I mean this as a real question, not a dramatic one. When someone shows you, clearly and repeatedly, what they have chosen, and you finally choose to believe them instead of the version of them you needed, is that strength or is that just being late? I've thought about this more than I expected to. Leave your answer below. She came home on a Tuesday afternoon. I was not there. I had taken the dog and driven to my brother's place in Darien for the day. Not to avoid her. To give her the full, unmediated experience of what she was walking back into. She called me at 3:47. Her voice was different. Still controlled. She was always controlled, but something underneath it had gone very still. She said, "Where are your things?" I said, "My things are where they've always been." She said, "Where are my things?" I told her about the storage unit. I gave her the address. I told her Valentina had the key. There was a long silence. Then she said, "So that's it." I said, "That's it." She asked if I was going to tell her why. I told her she already knew why. I told her that I had known about the conversation on her laptop for 3 weeks before she sat down with her tea and told me about the trip. I told her I had not said anything then because I had needed to see what she would choose when she thought she had no consequences. Another silence. Longer this time. I was going to tell you, she said. I know, I said. And maybe she was. I'll never know with certainty. And I have made my peace with not knowing. What I know is this. She made her choices with the confidence of someone who believed they were invisible. And I made mine with the clarity of someone who had already grieved, already planned, and was simply waiting for the moment to become official. I drove back to Westport that evening. The townhouse was quiet in the specific way that a space becomes quiet when it stops holding someone else's energy. The dog settled on the couch immediately. I made dinner. I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for something. I'm still not entirely sure what I was saving it for, but it felt right. It felt like exactly the right moment to open something good. My personal reflection: this incident is less about betrayal and more about the decision to stay conscious. He found the truth by accident and chose to let it finish arriving rather than interrupt it. That kind of patience is either wisdom or self-punishment, depending on the day you ask. Sophia wasn't monstrous. She was someone who wanted two things and took too long to choose. The cost of that delay was paid entirely by someone who had already done his grieving in private.